Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And I am really, really excited about what's starting to happen in the Facebook group.
It is cool, isn't it?
No, it really, for those of you who have jumped in the past week or two, it makes me just ridiculously happy to actually see some faces to it's one thing to look on our lips and stats and see all these downloads in different states and countries and whatnot.
It's just numbers though.
But they're just numbers. Yeah. And for me, it really is truly meaningful to put some faces to those numbers. So it's really exciting. We've actually had just in this last week or so, I actually just wanted to say hello and shout out to a couple of those people. We've had, if I completely bastardize or botch your names, I have sincere apologies, but I have no way of knowing. So I think all these I get good over though. So Helga Helene joined in from, I believe, Ohio, I think. Rylan Jones from Virginia, Stephen Sharp from Utah, which I think is our furthest away listener who's joined in so far. Lisa Van Allen's in Ohio, Sharon Frankel's in New Jersey. We have some local folks, Angie Huffman, Tony DeFada, Scott Athen, and Michelle Fewer, all from the Maryland, Baltimore area. And I have just been grinning all week.
It's so great to see them.
Yeah,
And you can have actually, it's the opportunity where they actually get to say stuff back.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. If you're one of those people who sort of talks back to us as you listen to episodes, you can actually
not in a bad way though.
hey, we're real and honest. If you want to get on and swear at us, please do. No, but a perfect example is after this past week's episode, there's a conversation just now starting about how you do those things, creating an environment that has the kind of impact you want if you don't have a brick and mortar kind of place, which is exactly the kind of overflow conversation I've really longed to be able to have. Because sometimes I have those thoughts after the episode. I'm like, oh, that's something else I wanted to say, or darn it, that's another thought I wanted to add back to that. So I'm just, in case you can't tell, I'm super excited. So to find that, there's a couple ways. You can either, when you're on Facebook, you can actually search for the SHMS podcast community. That's a little long and wordy. If you go to our Facebook page for So Here's My Story, there's actually a link right under the main picture of us that says visit the group. That will also take you there. And we hope to see you there. Absolutely.
It's a lot of fun to have these conversations. It's not just the two of us in a room, which I love.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, to be able to hear what our conversations inspired is really kind of cool.
Yep. So you want to thank our sponsors and then we'll get into it?
I do. As always, would like to thank Tom Loveland and Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, and Mary Craft Staffing and HR Solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do you have a story?
I do.
Okay. Well, that was great. That's not even.
And I'm gonna.
Not even the. Well, if you have one, no, you do.
No. No, I want to jump into this one.
All right, then it's all yours.
So here's my story. It's actually a story and then another story, but just about every time I come here to your office to record, I stop at the restrooms. Don't worry, this is not going to get super blue.
Could you just at least refer to this as the worldwide So Here's My Story podcasting headquarters? That's I want to create the image. It doesn't have to be in
when
my
I stop
back
at, what would that
room.
be? WWSHMS HQ.
Yes.
Whenever I pull up to the WWSHMS HQ, I stop at the potty on the way in, because I know I'll have to go otherwise. And on the way back out, I always laugh at this thing that happens like every single week. And I've mentioned it to you several times. I'm like, we're going to have to do an episode on this. And today is that day.
Today is that day
where, because as is typical, I'm always thinking about like 25 different things and what I need to do or whatever. So I wash my hands and then I go over to the paper towel machine, and it's an automatic machine. So I there's a paper towel there. I rip off the paper towel and I dry my hands and I throw it in. And what happens is it automatically instantly like sends out another paper towel. I am not yet conscious of this. And I like just because it shoved one out of me, I grab that one too, and I dry my hands. And it is usually right about the time I'm about ready to grab the third, or one time it was actually the fourth paper towel.
That consciousness
consciousness kicks in, and I'm like, I didn't need the second one. You know, it's kind of like the thing that happens with Girl Scout cookies, where suddenly you've eaten the sleeve of them, you know, like, and it always, and then I have a better sort of business related story, but it always, every single time, gets me thinking about unintended consequences and how there's certainly nothing wrong with having that paper towel, you know, spit out automatically. But I really, really, really want to like call your building maintenance people out of curiosity to find out if since installing these, like paper towel usage has increased exponentially, because I know at least I am using 2, 3, 4 more paper towels in my sort of checked outedness of autopilot. Maybe more people are a little more conscious, self-control or something, or paying attention. But it's that sort of unintended consequences. And I have an even better story, unless you just have a pressing urge to.
Well, no, I think what's interesting, and we'll get into the second story, so I don't want to derail you from a story that I have yet to hear, but what's interesting to me is that somewhere a decision was made that we're going to prioritize service. And in order to prioritize service and make it automatic, you've got to make assumptions about what service people want, what somebody else's, what your customer's priorities are. So they make an assumption that we want to make it easier for you to get the next paper towel.
So it's already there waiting when you
it's already there waiting.
Right.
So there's...
And that is, I will say, that is assuming that it was thoughtful versus just a sort of like accidental, nobody thought it through. So they just said it like, why not? So
true. They could have. There could have been an entire thought process behind, okay, well, how are we going to improve this product? Well, what's a person's primary need when using our product? The need is to get the next one.
Right. And they could have been trying to solve for that problem that we've all had, where you go up and you're doing like weird wax on, wax off moves, trying to like, where's the sensor, trying to get it to come out, and it's not coming out. So like, let's bypass that and just have it come out automatically. I mean, in that example, just the simplest little bit of a delay. I mean, I think honestly, if there was like a 2-second delay before it just spit another one out after you rip one off, I think I would have, I think it would keep me from just being in that autopilot way. I don't know for sure, but so that's one example of unintended consequences, which is a really hot button issue for me, because I think that so often solutions are jumped to without taking the time to think through unintended consequences. So a few years ago, I was a very, very, very happy customer, client, whatever, of Bill Me Later, which I'm not sure. Are they the ones that don't, they may not, maybe they do still exist. I don't know. Anyway, part of PayPal, or PayPal bought them or whatever. Yep. And it was sort of the credit version of PayPal. And I used them occasionally and would pay it off. I was very happy. So interesting thing happened. My account was hacked, or my eBay account was hacked, and therefore it compromised my Bill Me Later account because it was tied to it or something like that. It was a number of years ago. I don't remember exactly. Here's the part I remember. The way they had chosen to set up the accounts was based solely on your social security number, which may have had some sort of reason of like, oh, it's so simple because everybody has one. And why would we add this other number? You'll always know what it is. You don't have to know your account number, whatever. Right. Unintended consequence being, here I was a perfectly happy customer. Because my account was compromised, they had to close my account, and they had no way to start me another account.
Right. And well, unless you got a second social security number, which is kind of frowned upon. Has its own problems, I'll grant you.
Yeah. And it was such an awkward and hysterical phone call, because I was like, so you have abs. I was like, let me understand this. You have no way. I am sitting here ready, interested, excited maybe even to start a new account so that I can continue using your service. And you're telling me you have no way to do that because my social security number can no longer be used. And
wow.
They said, yes, that was, now they may have changed that practice. I mean, this was years and years ago, but every time they pop up in any sort of like thing, I always think about that, like, wow, that's a pretty big unintended consequence. And this is not to say that you should or even can think through every possible thing that might happen and avoid. I mean, frankly, sometimes I even hesitate to bring up this topic because it can also then lead to kind of analysis paralysis, indecision, because you're like, oh, I have to think through all the things that might happen. But last but not least, and this is sort of taking it over into a social realm, and then I'll actually let you talk for a second.
No need. I'm perfectly fine.
This week, Elliot's not even here. Jody's just ranting. This is where it really, really, really starts to get me, and why sometimes I have to sort of pull away from Facebook is when very, very, very simplistic answers get thrown out to large scale, complex social issues as like without even the slightest clue, thinking about like what would come out. And this could apply to a lot of different things, but the one that just absolutely cracked me up was somewhere this guy going on this rant that was going around on Facebook about how you should, really simple solution to the opioid crisis is to just let addicts die, or to not respond to them, not respond to calls about people overdosing, because then the problem would solve itself. They would just
seems Darwinian in a dark place.
So here's the part that I find fascinating about it. We don't even need to argue the ethics or the morals or whatever. I'm like, I can actually set that aside for a second and say, let's just be really like, okay, let's go implement that. What would that look like here? That would mean you would have to decide before you go that whether or not she's like, oh, I'm sorry we let you die of XYZ, but the lady who called in said it looked like you overdosed in that bathroom.
It is flash triage.
It is flash triage. Or unless you're suggesting that EMTs would go out to the scene and be like, yep, it's an overdose. Okay, let's go home. Which I think is, I don't even think that's what he was suggesting. It's just like, we don't respond to overdoses, whatever. But then it also begs the question, you're like, okay, if we're actually going to divide things into like responsible versus irresponsible, does that mean you don't save drunk drivers? Does that mean, so just, I think unintended consequences of decisions and operational, this is where I think it has a real, not just a Jody rant, but a real business validity, is thinking through. It's really, really easy to throw out big ideas that sound like great solutions without thinking through how you would actually implement them from an operational standpoint. And it drives me crazy.
Well, my favorite big solution to a simple solution to a huge problem is a long time ago when Chris Rock had said that he didn't favor gun control at all. He thought guns should be made freely available, but bullets should cost $500 a piece. And, his point was that if somebody gets shot multiple times, they needed killing. Somebody actually thought that I'm going to make this investment. And, but the point is that there are so many policies that we've run into, like the paper towels, where there are unintended consequences. And I'll give you one others, which is when my wife and I bought a Nespresso coffee machine. Mm-hmm. And so we had ordered it from Williams-Sonoma. It's really good coffee. And so we were going to pay for this exorbitantly overpriced machine. So we did, but it was on back order. The kind she wanted was on back order. So we paid for it and we were waiting. And then it didn't come, and it didn't come, and it didn't come. She called, they apologized, and they gave her a $50 gift card as some sort of good faith apology, whatever. And then it didn't come, and it didn't come, and she called, and they said, okay, well, we can cancel the order. And so reluctantly she said fine, and so they credited the credit card, and then a week later the machine arrived. So now we have $50. We had all of our money back, and we had this machine. So I called up Nespresso and I explained this, right. And I said, we have this machine. So I just, I ought to pay for it.
Or where do I pay for it or whatever.
Yeah. Cause we wanted the machine. So
right.
I said, so I have to pay for it. And the woman said, no. And I said, well, what do you mean no? She said, well, you see, the limitation of our system is that in order for me to accept a payment, I have to attach it to a product to be shipped. And because there's no product to be shipped, I have nothing to attach the payment to. Right. So our system won't accept payment. And so, I asked her, my first reaction was to ask her if she sold cars.
Right.
Because that would
delay
be cool.
It, cancel it.
What they had decided was their system works best. You can't accept money without a product attached.
Sure.
I get that.
Yeah.
But then what they didn't account for was, well, what happens in a delay, back order, ship, whatever situation.
Yeah. And I am, so as ranty as I can get about these, I do want to try and make it more useful because every story that we're talking about, doesn't really, it's a lot easier to look in the rearview mirror and realize what you should have done differently. So I really want to be fair about like what's the request I'm making around unintended consequences. And I think part of it is just simply to think it through, and not just on your own, but like operationally. I see, sometimes I wish there was a little bit more kind of go talk to the people who actually are going to do the thing or are going to take the calls or have to practice, interestingly, with back to the paper towels, which I thought was such a silly example, but we keep coming back to it. Do those paper towel manufacturers ever check in with janitors about what kind of things that they see? The people who say like, well, I used to only have to refill that thing once a week and now I have to refill it 3 times a week. And, so just doing a little bit more investigation, but also being quick to notice unintended consequences and recalibrate or course correct. That's the part where sometimes I think they become very easy to just say, oh, well, that's just the way it is. But
so one thing that occurred to me, because we had this conversation in my office, we converted about a year ago our billing system from paper to in the cloud pretty much. And so we send out our invoices by email. Everything works fine. Well, the company that we work with has come up with a new feature where a client can log in and they can see not just their bill, which is helpful. They can see their bill. They can pay their bill online. But they can also see if I enter time, they can see that in pretty much real time. Even though the invoice hasn't gone out, they can see the time. And this was being touted by the company in newsletters and things. And I thought, this would be awful. Because it's not just the old, do you really want your customers to see the sausage being made?
Right.
But at the same time, what would happen, at least this is my anticipation, if my clients happen to have nothing better to do than to log in and see what I'm doing, if they see telephone conference with opposing counsel, well, that might be a preliminary and he's getting back to me, I'm getting back to her, whatever it is. But that would automatically cause people of a certain personality or certain attention to start calling. I see you called. I see you spoke to her the other day. What happened? What's going on? And we've talked about this before. Part of your job, responsibility, whatever you want to call it, is anxiety management of your clients, like deciding what's important for them to know. What do they not need to hear every little detail of? Because it's genuinely not hiding from them, but just genuinely not worth their worry. It's interesting. And part of it is also that as it's going on, we will put everything on the bill because I can review it before it goes out and I see what the other attorneys have done or what the other people collaborating on the bill have done. It might not be on the final bill. A lot of times it's not, but it's a way to track, this is almost like a diary. Right. This is what's going on. But if it's in real time, then it's these unedited, unfiltered charges and line items that might get people unnecessarily concerned or it basically what it does is it raises the anxiety level and it raises the amount of time that we would spend talking to people on things that may not matter just because we're serving the goal of transparency. Well, it's true. I mean, what that says to me is that, and not accusing that particular software of this, but I think sometimes you really see that when a software is developed not by people who are truly, truly entrenched in the user experience and not just user experience as in the like, how many clicks do you have to get to this thing? Because I think that's sort of the surface level of user experience, but truly the experience of the user. And somebody's like, oh, hey, we can have this transparency. That's awesome. Not really thinking through about like, is that transparency helpful or is it not helpful? And maybe it is, sometimes maybe it's not. And I guess it does come back to that, because I don't want to create a sense of paralysis around like, we have to think of everything, but maybe it's just a heightened awareness of something I know we've said before of like every solution comes with a new set of problems and just try to think through what those next set of problems might be. I mean, a really simple version of this that I did personally when I hired my very first assistant
one of the things that was just slogging me down was I had all these emails that a few of them needed truly nuanced responses from me. Many of them just needed a quick reply of like to spin that plate again, to sort of volley it back to them. So she sat with we were both logged into my email. She sat with the computer. I sat with an email. I was writing the longer ones. She would call out a name and I'd be like, oh, we kind of got down this system, like, pleasant greeting. This is the main sentence, and she kind of got my voice or whatever down really quickly. So between the two of us in this first 8 hours together, we knocked through all these lingering, hanging out, weighing on me, worried about emails that I just needed to kind of spin the plate. And she was only there one day a week at the time. So what I did not think through all the way was that I had just volleyed back 150 conversations.
And those balls come right back over the net.
Came right back over the net. She was there on Mondays. On Tuesday, I was even more swamped than I'd ever been. It was like, oh my God, I just started 150 conversations that had been otherwise lying dormant quietly there by themselves. So that was pretty funny. But that's a small version of it. But if I, it's one of those things that had I thought about it for even 5 seconds, I probably could have realized okay, maybe we do 20 at a time or pick the 20 most important and get through those. But I was so excited to just knock them out and be done with it. I traded that short-term relief for a soon-to-be short-term heightened anxiety.
Well,
it came out quickly.
And I do the same thing when I go through my seizures of touching base with my network, and I'll send out 50 coffee invitations, and I have my calendar that link so people can sync and they can book appointments. But then all of a sudden, for about 2.5 months, I can't go to the gym because I'm at first thing in the morning. But
you're supposed to block those things in first.
I know you are, but again, did not think it through. But one of the questions that I had for you when you talk about thinking through the unintended consequences, I'm a big fan of picking a number of people with whom I have this kind of relationship and saying, okay, I'm going to try this thing. Whether it's the bill, if I were coming out with a billing app or whatever it is, to have certain dedicated users and try it. But I'm wondering if you've ever worked with or thought about, instead of rolling something out, how you could compile your focus group to work, whether there's a way to do that, or does everybody have to have a board of advisors, or how does that work?
No, I mean, I'm a big fan of beta testing. I mean, that's something that is a no-brainer in the startup tech world. You do not, if you build it, they will come in the tech world. You come up with a minimum viable product, you get it out there, you have people test it. You often find out they like and don't like all the different, completely different things than what you thought they were going to. And I think that there are ways to do almost anything like that. I mean, I think there is a beta test version of anything, even though we're not software technology. You can try with a small group of people, see how it goes, test it out. I think the thing that I see least thought about or least considered sometimes is where there are operational choices made that from an operational standpoint or a logistics standpoint make absolute perfect sense. And the unintended consequences that I think get skipped over sometimes are the human element, the human reaction person. I mean, a really specific, a really fantastic example was a company I did some work with who had, through acquisition, purchased 10 or 12 smaller companies across the United States. And as those all kind of came into, all got settled in, what someone, and this is, you can feel this is not an illogical thought, said, well, it's silly that we have at every one of these locations, we have customer service people and salespeople and accounting and legal and blah, 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 this whole list of people. We should at least, sales we need there because those salespeople have to go sell regionally. But legal, we can swoop legal out and have one legal team at our headquarters. And, and there's all sorts of reasons that may be a great idea.
On paper.
Customer service, or, I can't even remember what the operator, there were several things that like, oh, that should all be in one place. So they sucked those out of each individual location and put them in this other place. And this is the thing I always listen for. When they did that, it shifted legal, which in this industry was the thing that, like, if you were the salesperson, you had to get it passed through legal. So like already that's a potential for an adversarial kind of issue.
Yes.
So that changed legal from being Sharon 8 offices down to a proper noun with a capital L, legal.
Right.
So now legal is this faceless group of demonized humans.
And no more collaboration.
42 states away who just always say no. And there's no like understanding that they're humans, because you don't, if Sharon down the hall had a bad day because her kid, just got in a wreck or something, and there's like empathy, there's compassion, there's understanding that they're trying to do a good job, and you see it. And so sometimes things that operationally make so much sense, but you just don't think through like what happens. And I'll say it doesn't mean it was the wrong decision to move everything down there. Maybe it was, but it has to be done in a way somehow that human element, because it ended up, that was the whole reason I was there, is that was a huge cultural issue that was having all sorts of other unintended consequences. So I think that's the part where I really start to see the impact of not thinking through, like, how do humans react in this circumstance? It's sort of the art of beside the science of operations.
Right. And so one of the things that I found helpful with a lot of the companies that I've worked with is the effort made now to compile the focus group before you have an initiative. In other words, you're not going to decide your best escape route while the flames are licking under the door. You want to figure out what you're going to do in this situation. It's really rehearsing for change. How are you going to react? And a lot of the entrepreneurs that I talk to, a lot of the established business people I talk to, have said, well, I don't know who those people are because we're right now, we haven't needed it for the past couple of years. I can see that we might coming up, but we haven't needed it. And we have these conversations, say, well, figure out who those people are now. And
wait, I don't understand the example. What people? Like people who?
The people that would be your focus group. The people that you would talk to, even the ones to give the real human reaction to what looks good on paper. Who can you actually talk these things through now that are not part of the initial decision-making process that gets so sucked into, what looks good on paper that they can't see the unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies that I've worked with don't have that kind of list put together of who are the customers they'd like to talk to, just to get a finger on the pulse. Who are the people on the front lines of their operations that are not in the C-suite, just to get their finger on the pulse.
Yeah, and it's tiny little things. I think this is, I can give you 2 perfect examples, and because I do tend to kind of lean back towards the examples where it's the human element that got overlooked in these unintended consequences, or like our very first story, the Jody human element, where she'll just keep taking paper towels as long as they're offered. But I just, this was not something I was there to work on in the company, but it kept coming up hysterically. And it was such a small thing, or it should be such a small thing. But when I tell the story, you'll understand why it wasn't. They had instituted a new, they had never kept time logs. Like they didn't have any kind of time sheets or anything like that. And so they instituted that because this new system, they had that capability, and they'd been meaning to do it for a while, blah, blah, blah. For whatever reason, they had always preferred to, so I think of it as direct and indirect time, or, something in overhead. A lot of people call it different kinds of things. But because they thought there was some language vocabulary in the company about being a producer, because they're the people who actually made things, or produced, design, whatever. And then there were people who, I'm trying not to say enough that somebody around here won't be able to guess what company it is. So that's why I'm like, how can I say this? They have like producers. And then there were people who were the support staff force supporting that. So what they ended up doing, and why you'd have to check this through with somebody, I don't know, because someone should have been able to see this problem coming. But they ended up rolling it out that you either had to log your time as productive time or non-productive time.
Is that like non-essential personnel?
Almost. Well, I think it's almost worse than non-essential, because essential, you could at least say like, okay, I understand that, like, yeah, if I'm not there, the wheels don't start, the wheels don't come off the car, whatever. But like productive. And I was talking to this woman and she was like, there is just something so demoralizing about putting 10 hours a day down as non-productive time. She goes, every single day I fill out my timesheet and it makes me feel bad about myself. And
wow.
But it's such a perfect example. Had you just called like 3 people from each, 3 people who were producers and 3 people who were sort of this other group of people and said like, hey, what do you think of this new system? They would have very quickly heard like, not loving the non-productive time. Like, I know it's silly. I know it's just a word, but it's demoralizing.
One of my friends was a consultant brought in by a government agency and found out that the most demoralizing thing that they were doing is they would get, it was this little tally on the bottom of a weekly email from wherever headquarters was, telling them how many days they had until retirement, until they hit retirement age. And so the team started thinking of it like a sentence, like, you'll be released in, I've got, how many do you have, Bob?
Oh my God, that's hysterical.
I've got 18,000 days.
How long are you in here for? That's a riot. Yeah. And I'm sure somebody thought, this is a cool metric.
Yes, it's a cool metric, and people want to know, when do I get my full benefits in retirement? So why don't we just keep them informed?
Yeah. Yeah. But I do think your point about just asking people, not because my point here is not that you have to figure it all out, but just asking around. I was involved with a company who was going through a merger one time. I may have even mentioned this story already on here. They were going through a merger with another company. And again, you have to leading often comes down to choosing between several not great options. I think sometimes when people get very upset at leadership for some things they choose, I wish you could be like, you should have seen the other options. Like, I know this wasn't a great one, but the other options were even worse. But in this case, the 2 companies had wildly misaligned titles. And there was just no way that they couldn't course correct that somehow. And they were so misaligned that you couldn't course correct up. There'd be no place left to go. Like there was really no other way to handle it than the one company. Everyone had to go from like senior vice president to vice president, or vice president to whatever is like, whatever. Like everyone had to take a step down, which they weren't losing pay. They weren't losing, but they just had to align these things. Otherwise it just wasn't going to make sense. And I think everyone understood that there was no getting around that, but this is the place where you can create such value out of thinking through the unintended parts of those consequences. Because they went to great lengths to explain to everybody, okay, you're not losing pay, you're not losing this. They thought they were taking care of it. And in some very vulnerable conversations, what more than one person brought to my attention, and I was able, fortunately, to kind of float this up so they spread it around, was, do you know what was really bugging people about it?
What's that?
Have you any guesses? No, don't guess, because if you guess, then I'll be bummed that you got it. I retract.
I knew that was a double-edged sword there.
Yeah. Anyway, no, what bugged them was that when they went to change their thing on LinkedIn, that it would send this message out that says, Elliot Wagenheim is vice president instead of senior vice. Like they were going to have to alert, and that people
has a new job, and
that people who didn't understand the story would think that they had been demoted or whatever. You can just feel the pain of that. And very simple solution. There's a way to hit pause on notifications on LinkedIn, so you can make all the changes you want, and then it doesn't get broadcast out to everyone in the world. Simple solution to something that I cannot even explain to you the ache in the eyes of these people who were dreading that moment where that thing would go out. It was really a hit in the ego. So it's not just about trying to think through every little thing. It's just looking for the opportunities where you can smooth out or predict the human kind of road bumps in it, and make it a little easier, I guess.
And then the last thing that I'll say as we wrap up is, one of the things that I often see, and I talk to people about what is lacking, is that having gone through this pothole-filled road, all of these bumps, and having hit every single one of them, from LinkedIn to all of the unintended consequences, I find that there's often not as much emphasis on becoming a learning organization, so that the next time, the next acquisition or the next paper towel holder installation, you don't hit the same pothole.
Yes, absolutely. This is not about like stacking up regrets. Thank you for clarifying that, because I have, like I said, I had some real hesitations about this topic because I don't want it to create indecision and I don't want it to focus on regrets. It's about being that beta test learning organization where you're like, oops, that didn't go so well. Next time.
What are we going to do?
Next time.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.